would like to just start by thanking Ki Awaaz and Anshul and everybody in the team for organizing events like this where young people can come together and think through not just gender, but a whole host of other issues that are related, all interconnected. And it's important to have these kinds of discussion spaces in a time like this, in cities, in all kinds of cities, urban, rural, everywhere. So really it's great that you guys are doing this, and I'm very, very happy to be part of it. So just wanted to start with saying that conversations on gender are not sexy in a way in which conversations on sexuality have now become in spaces like this. And I think that's why it's important to have that kind of discussion, to really think through and remind ourselves that gender has been our lens of analysis for very significant reasons, and reasons that are really, really important today. And coming from a time when we were all frustrated by how conversations on gender were located, to say कि भाई खाली महिलाओं का gender नहीं होता है, बाकियों का भी होता है. So it is not just for women that you have to think about gender. So coming from that to a place now where we have sort of spoken of gender as fluid and varying according to culture and context. We have spoken about gender as a space where you perform and you conform to certain ideas that already exist. We've talked about transgression, and that's something we might get into more today. And we've also sort of started looking at who really can transgress, and under what circumstances and for what. And what is the limit of that kind of transgression, what is allowed and what is not, even within when you transgress. And then also not to forget that there is a norm, and for many people, this norm is enforced very violently, but for many people it is also instinctive and, quote unquote, natural in many ways. So let us also understand, along with, where does oppression lie, what leads to violence, but also look at, how does this question of taking apart gender construct identification with complicity. So when are you sort of, complicit in a certain kind of system which you might not like, but also, does definition then not even belong to you even if you're privileged in this system? So how do we locate that? How do we locate people who do identify with a certain kind of dominant normative gender? Just two more points in the mix that I will throw, and then I will shut up and give over the mic to others. But how do you identify? I've also been thinking through, particularly in the context of friends who've had children who are growing up now, to see how the structure of male, female, and other now fixes you even within that. And even if it pretends to say that there is a fluidity in this whole male, female, and now other open category, what it's also doing is that along with this real man and real woman, we also have this real trans. So what does that mean, and how does that really affect real lives of people, and how maybe, coming from the space of having friends converse with me around it being very difficult for children to grow up where they are not normative, and for parents to give a space to children to figure out gender identity and self on their own, because the structure around it does not allow this to happen at all. And then the relevance of this discussion today, in a time where we've had these really highly public gendered performances co-opting nationalism, patriotism, motherhood, Bharat Mata, all of that in the mix, highlighting a certain gender in that conversation today which is happening in our country. And how does this conversation happen still ignoring the fact that there is structural oppression on the basis of gender against everybody who does not pass as what they are perceived to be or supposed to be, or all of that. So in this entire context of a whole range of views that have come a long way on understanding gender, looking at the binary, breaking it apart, or identifying with it, we can start this conversation from here to look at, how do we see where we are right now, and where do we want to head as we go forward from here. So just wanted to place some of these ideas in the mix when we start, and very happily now give over the mic to Shambhavi, who has her own mic, so I don't have to take this one. Is this working? Yeah. Okay. So very happy to now give over the mic and talk to Shambhavi.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Shambhavi, and I currently work for Cake, which is what Anshul just introduced in the beginning. So Cake is this really special online space that we at Ki Awaaz have created to discuss exactly these things. And it's just been a huge pleasure building that platform and helping that platform grow, because these conversations are really, really important for us to have. And a lot of us growing up and even now have so many questions about what gender is, about what sexuality is, about what expression is. So it's really great to have that platform to talk about these things. And also for everyone who already works in the area of gender and sexuality, to also return to some basic ideas like what is gender, what is sexuality, the continuum, the spectrum, and what do we mean when we say these things. And again, what Manak had said about, it being a binary, but then this new binary of cisgender and transgender. So you have people who identify with with the gender assigned at birth, and then you have people who don't. So that is also evolving as another binary. And when we really talk about fluidity, what are we talking about? So these are kind of things that we like to explore on this platform. And just to sort of introduce myself further beyond this is, I'm 22 years old. I'm doing a master's program in JNU, so I'm apparently a 3,000 condom using anti-national. Thank you. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on there right now, and again, as Manak said, these conversations are also evolving from that when we talk about Bharat Mata and everything. So yeah, gender, the discussions about what it is definitely making somewhat of a comeback in a new way, because we're not. Sexuality is sexy, but gender is just women's problems. And why does it kind of boil down to just that? So that's also something that I'm looking forward to working on, and the discussion here and hearing what people think about that. Why is it just limited to women's issues, and why are we not looking at trans people, non-binary people? It's a huge spectrum, so we should talk about that. What else? How else do I introduce myself? So these issues have been really, really close to me since I was a kid, when I was going through my own little struggles in school and not sure where I fit on the spectrum. And then also this whole thing of you have to fit somewhere on the spectrum, you have to have a label to yourself. So just kind of working through that while growing up, and then coming to some understandings in college, and still working on it in my 20s. All of these conversations are deeply personal to some level, but also something that needs to be shared between everyone, because I feel that that's something everybody goes through in school, and we need to be able to talk about it and have a language as well that we can use to talk about it. So that's what I like to do.
Thanks. Thank you, and that's a very interesting. For me, this whole idea of the alphabet soup, as we call it a lot of times, this increasing set of letters LGBTIHQ is actually, so it's been interesting to look at how we are expanding how many of these options available there are, but still expecting people somewhere to fit into one or the other. And that's an interesting thing that we should definitely take up in the discussion today. But thank you so much for bringing that in. And yeah, if you guys haven't seen Cake, I love Cake. So you guys should all get a piece of it. But Pramada, if we can go to you next.
My name is Pramada Menon, and I'm a queer feminist activist. Been around for clearly far too long. And yes, thank you, Ki Awaaz, because I'm quite amazed that you've been able to pull off 11 o'clock meeting with so many people in the audience. I'm so used to going for meetings at 11 o'clock where everyone arrives at 12. So for me, it's like a huge thing to see people actually wanting to come in. So a little bit, I think we live in an era where everyone currently is busy being the first. And we are the first who did the first queer exhibition, we are the first who actually thought of queer, etc., etc. And part of me feels that I need to sort of reclaim the word gender, coming from a women's movement standpoint. In the early 90s, if I stood up in a meeting and said, what about gender? People looked at you and said, oh God, she's a feminist. And that was the worst insult you could get. In the late 90s and early 2000s, when I said, what about sexuality? Then you were definitely a lesbian. And those were the clear kind of definitions. What we do need to understand is gender as a construct or as conversation happened very clearly for a very clear reason. There was a way in which we were talking about economics, there was a way in which we were talking about development at a time when the only way you talked about it was to go to the male head in a village and say, what is it that the women want? And of course he had the answers because he was the patriarch of the village. And really then the whole notion that there had to be an understanding where you moved from women in development to women and development to gender and development. And I would suggest that just go online and look at WID, WAD, GAD, which is the way we all learnt it in development. And that's how actually the origins of talking about gender came. It has never been sexy. And I think that what is interesting for me is that now everyone talks of sexuality because it's the in thing. And we don't talk about gender because we feel we've dealt with it. And actually a simple thing would be that I feel the arguments in the 80s for many of us who wanted to be out of the house was really, can we be out of the house till 7 o'clock in the evening? The arguments now is, can we be out till 11:30, 12, right? Or later. And I think we need to understand that there's been a progression which allows that conversation to happen. There has been a progression in conversations around gender and sexuality which has made it easier for us because many before us have actually reached that point where we've put the notion that you can be queer, the notion that you can be lesbian, the notion that Vikramaditya can be at a meeting in a sari, is because people have fought to get to that place and made it available. So what we take for granted right now and what we think of as sexy has been a battle long won. And it's been something that a lot of us, and including now, we're continuing to struggle with it. So I wish to place that on the table first to say that there was a reason before we start dissing gender. Please try and understand why gender appeared on the horizon. The second bit is that of course it's binary, because how else did people, how else were people to talk about it at that point? Because you only talked about men and women, because they were the only ones visible. It's like my mother, who now lives with me, who's 81, lives in a state of perpetual trauma because she says, I never know who's coming to the house. You say your friend is coming, and then I assume the friend is male, and then you say, no, the friend is not male, but is female. Then I think, okay, if that is female, that's fine, and then, but they are involved with a man, so what does that make it, and what does this, all these new words that you keep telling me, what does it mean? So we're all equally confused. It's not as though gender in its current form is something that we understand. And I think many of us who are practitioners of doing that horrible thing called training workshops, which is what I do a lot of my time, part of it is to demystify sex and gender, which is the usual conversation that sex is biological and gender is constructed. And part of what we are doing is really to say that sex is constructed and so is gender constructed. And we need to start understanding it that way. Because we need to look at the whole notion that people are whatever they want to be, and we have to allow that to happen, but clearly that does not happen. And I think often what we do is we mix up sex, sexuality, sexual identities with gender identities. Because clearly LGBTIKQ, J, F, T, whatever the number of words we want to add on, which we have to, because we need to make it obviously all inclusive, becomes something that we just keep talking about, but we never talk about what does it mean to be trapped in a gender, whether or not you've been assigned a female gender at birth or a male gender at birth, and what that female gender is expected to play out. So as Pramada Menon, and as a woman, as I identify as woman, what does it mean to be in this body, which basically decides for me how the world is going to interact with me, which has very little to do with how I want to interact with the world. And so we need to understand that, because for me, I feel that sexuality, or what you choose to be, or how you choose to interact with the world in terms of your carnal desire, in terms of your lust, in terms of your love, in terms of romance, in terms of whatever words you want to give, is something else that happens along the way. But we are so caught up in these identities because frankly, there are moments when I think if we were gender fluid, then really would we need all those categories of LBTQ, X, Y, Z? We would not, because we could then just be. But what I would really like all of you to sort of, as a precursor to even getting into this discussion, is to start thinking about gender as the nation, right? Which is this wonderful concept that we're being thrown at regularly. So if you look at gender as a country, who is allowed entry and who is allowed to get out? How many of us are born into that? And how do we get our passports? So clearly for me, I have a passport of being a woman because I have the requisite vagina and the breasts. small, large, we're not getting into those details, but the fact that I do have it allows me entry into woman. The moment I want to transgress from that, I do not have permission to transgress because the boundaries are very tight. The borders are sealed. So you have to pass. So for the 100 times that I try to go through security and I move towards the women, I'll have 200 people telling me I'm in the wrong queue because I don't pass. So we have to start looking at gender as a country where the borders are very tightly patrolled. We are the ones patrolling it. We are the ones who are actually the handmaidens of patriarchy. Don't diss patriarchy and say we've done away with it, we don't believe in anything patriarchal. Unfortunately, each one of us sitting here are the handmaidens. And we play out patriarchy, and we play out patriarchy very beautifully also in the way of how is this person dressed? What are these odd clothes? Should she be wearing it? She's too fat, she's too thin. He's dressed in a sari, there's something completely wrong with him. She doesn't look good enough in those trousers, etc., etc. Let's start with the basic of that. Do we wax or do we not wax? Do we have facial hair? Do we not have facial hair? Many things, many other such things. So think of gender as a country with tightly patrolled borders, which entry and exit is based on how you pass, and it's not enough to just be okay. It's not enough for you to be an immigrant. You have to swear allegiance. And the moment you stop swearing that allegiance to whatever the identity that you've been given at birth, that's when you're screwed in many ways, because then the only other option you have is to say you're trans, which you may not be. And this whole thing about cis versus trans, I also have a huge problem because cisgender should be something that I wish to take on as terminology. I always have it thrust upon me that you're cisgender. Hey, I can't help that I was born a woman, right? It's how you end up performing that womanhood or whatever it is that was given to me on a plate. So I feel that all these terminologies we use, even for gender, is something that people need to choose for themselves. If you choose to be cis, then that's great, congratulations. You wish to be trans, congratulations. Don't push it down my throat. Because I have fought very hard to not be that woman who was assigned female gender at birth and have worked to break those binaries. So I think that just as we are transphobic and we are homophobic and we are heteronormative and we are homonormative, we are also gender normative. Many of us would like to sort of push people into these little boxes, and I would say, can we look at a world where everybody can just be what they want without having to using these terminologies, then maybe we won't be so screwed up.
Thank you. I think it's a lot of interesting connections to make here from where we come while talking about gender earlier to what is the history of this whole discussion and placing it centrally as been, and what is the struggle around placing this kind of idea in in the work that we do on ground or in discussions like this. And I think also a very, very useful image and standpoint to look at this whole idea of gender as a country, where the whole notion of body, country, gender is enveloped in this whole idea of when do you pass and how, what gives you the passport, how do you apply for that visa. I think Vikram, you've done also some writing around this whole idea of gendered bodies and looking at whether violence is an outcome or is the very basis of these kinds of classification. And so it would be good to sort of look at even that whole broad spectrum of where do we place violence, what does that mean, and then how do you respond to all of the other ideas that are in this discussion.
Okay, hi, I'm Vikram. Everything else about me is completely unimportant for now, except the fact that I'm in a sari. So let's look at, one of the ways in which, I still think gender has become sexy. The amount of articles that I see every day and people speaking about gender, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And so it has to be sexy if it's that popular. It just couldn't work otherwise. So I want to push you on a couple of things, and I'm going to go on full-on teacher mode, so you have to forgive me. But I have 4 points to make, and I'm going to make them really quickly. The first is, what is the question of the binary in the first place? Right? Who is the binary? And what do we understand by the binary? Right? Is it every man versus every woman? We know this for a fact that it isn't. Right? Dalit women have tried to be women and have failed miserably. effeminate men, the Bengali man from colonial India was said to be too effeminate to lead the Indian nationalist struggle, so he had to man up, right? And it was Swami Vivekananda who recommended eating beef to man up, by the way, just saying. Right, whose primary idol was masculinity from the otherwise, where he borrowed at the same time as before even the famous man that we hate for Nazi Germany, Hitler wrote on the Aryan thesis, Swami Vivekananda was banking on it, right? And he is of course the statue that we're all garlanding this year, so we must think about it a little more. But I'm thinking about if the question of the binary is not simply about other people but all of you, has the question for what makes a large part of this audience of the binary been resolved? I'm tangentially part of a movement called Pinjra Tor, where women are still fighting to get out at 8 o'clock, right? So the Central Library in Delhi University is open till 2 in the morning. The curfew time for women's hostels and PGs is 8. So which means that from 8 to 2, the only people sitting and occupying public spaces in universities, at least in Delhi University, are men. So imagine like putting a video camera outside Central Library in Delhi University and 8 o'clock seeing a flush of women move out of the university and go into cages. Right? This cage can be, of course, this cage is metaphorical because the hostel is saying we're doing this for your parent, and the parent is saying we're doing this for the nation, and the nation is saying we're doing this for you. And Smriti Irani is saying I'm doing it for Rohit, and Rohit is saying, and Rohit can't talk because he's dead, but she says no, he wasn't dead when he was dead. And so there are various kinds of conversations, but I'll come to Rohit in a bit. Right? So if you thought that the question of gender for you is over and it's the question for Pramada and Vikram, think again. Right? Think about how you constantly have to do gender in order to even come here. You have to put yourself through one of those those barriers in the metro and allow another man or another woman to check you, frisk you, touch you inappropriately because the nation wants security. Your bags are subject to, like if you're carrying a bottle of water and it's a glass bottle, they'll ask you to open it. Your gender, your questions about your freedom, excuse me, are far from over. So if you think you're going to come and fight my fight, fight your own. So let's bring the question back to the binary. Right? Let's bring the question primarily to all of you because मैं अपने question खुद थोड़ा solve कर लूँगा. I have a bunch of community of people who are thinking about gender. Let's think about all of you because I really pity all of you. So let's look at violence, which is the primary framework to which conversations about gender have become sexy. That is, all of you will argue that the problem with gender is the problem with violence. Right, so the question is that all of you find gender problematic because they don't let you do this and they don't let you do that and they don't let you say this and they don't let you say that. I'm not allowed to wear this, I'm not allowed to wear that, my boyfriend polices me, my father polices me, etc, etc. So the problem really is not gender, it's violence. You don't have a problem with your desire for gender. All of you just want a desire for gender which is more nuanced. You know, I should be allowed to wear bangles on unwaxed arms and walk out at 10 o'clock. You don't have a problem with gender. You have a problem with the violence that gender entails on you. And so in this framework in which all of you read articles, etc., the problem about gender is not a problem about gender, but it's about violence. The problem is that certain desires that are inhibited, the inhibition on those desires is the problem. So if you desire to be a woman, that's not a problem. Your problem is that while I want to be a woman, my daddy says come back at 8, or now mummy says come back at 8, or Smriti Irani says come back at 8. Right? But somebody is saying come back at 8. That's the problem. Now I want to really think about what is this limited conception of gender that we have. Why is the very desire for gender not under scrutiny? Right? So we want people to have various kinds, precisely what Pramada is saying, we want people to be innovative about gender. People should desire gender. Not the annihilation of gender, to borrow a term from somebody who is very popular these days but not read, Ambedkar. Right? So I teach at Ambedkar University, sadly, which doesn't do Ambedkar. So let's just bring this question back to gender and how do we understand gender. How many people here have seen Jab We Met? Great, amazing. For the rest of you, please go see it. It's an amazing film. So in Jab We Met, you have the opening shot, if all of you remember. You have and I'm going to describe the opening shot just because I want to make 3 points about gender from that opening shot. I think Jab We Met is the feminist text of our times. So you have a train passing, moving out of a railway station. The opening shot is of a train moving out of the railway station, and you hear a woman tell a man to load her stuff, right? Classed nature of our genders. This porter is loading some stuff onto the train, and he says to Kareena Kapoor, who's not yet in the frame, you just hear the stuff, and the stuff is really obnoxious. There's sabji, there is some vegetables, there's some Guru Nanak ki photo and whatnot. So she's carrying various kinds of paraphernalia. The paraphernalia that makes her gender, not that any paraphernalia about gender can be organized. But, so she says, the man turns to her, the porter turns to her, because he still has male privilege, and says, why don't you get on the train, we'll load this stuff. The idea of gender as violence, you're telling me what to do. She responds saying, you load the stuff, I'll get on the train. Right? The everyday resistance we have towards gender. All of you breaks, it's not Vikramaditya in a sari who's breaking stereotypes. All of us break stereotypes every now and then. Now all of you do it more often. Thank God for a feminist movement in this country that's lasted 40-50 years. Right? So the idea that some of us break the binary is nonsense. The moment you tell a man that I can fucking look after myself, the man's like, ye kaisi aurat hai? I was trying to look after you, why are you not letting me look after you? Why am I? And so the various questions of good woman, bad woman, naughty girl, good girl, rebellious woman, non-rebellious woman. I mean, there is no such category as a rebellious woman. That's a contradiction in terms of patriarchy. But that's the idea. So you have the idea of policing and you have the idea of resistance. She gets onto the train after Guru Nanak. And once she gets onto the train, the man is still holding her arm, who helped her, aided her to get on the train. She says at that moment, she says, Ab to haath chhod do, itni bhi sundar nahi hu. Leave my hand now, I'm not that beautiful. She gave him consent to hold the hand, and then she's saying, I'm revoking it now, it's no longer allowed. She says that she recognizes that she is beautiful. She is in no way denying the pleasures of occupying a certain gender, of looking Kareena Kapoor, right? How her desire to look Kareena Kapoor is another matter. But the fact that she does look like Kareena Kapoor and is absolutely stunning is precisely the point, right? So you do actually gain everyday pleasures from your gender. The way you sometimes stop by a car and look in the mirror and check if you're looking okay. Or take a selfie, right? All of you take selfies. All of you actually gain certain pleasures from gender. So gender isn't primarily only about violence. It's also about a complicity with its pleasures. And the third point, which is the most difficult point to critique gender, which is why I am an annihilationist, is that, so she moves on to the train and the man leaves her hand and she's walking towards her compartment and she says, my parents wanted me to go through the AC compartment. Right? And she asks the most brilliant question ever in the history of feminism. She says, what is the relationship between an AC and my gender? Right? Now this is absolutely brilliant. Why do objects around us have gendered meanings? Because the way we give meaning to objects is through gender. Right? So part of the framework of our complicity about gender is that our world will fall apart if we don't organize it according to gender lines. We'll fall apart. And it's precisely this point about we falling apart that I want to come to. Finally, I'm going on full-on teacher mode. Manak must be kidding me, but I'm going to speak for another 5 minutes. You know, there's somebody called Marx who's somebody, right? And he wrote in the 19th century an important idea of the commodity. There's like this bottled water, which is now a commodity, and I now have to buy water. I bought a lot of water when the Jats went on this strike, right? So the ways in which I access is like in Jab We Met, you have a Guru Nanak ki photo, you have vegetables, you have the train ticket, all of this is commodity, right? What I wear, etc. is commodity. And Marx says something really brilliant about the commodity. He says, the commodity produces its own desire. You think that the desire is coming from within you, but the desire actually comes from outside. Think about love at first sight, right? Think about seeing somebody and falling in love with instantly. The idea is that the desire seems to be coming from outside, but you think it's coming from within. It's something true to you, right? Think about walking in a mall and seeing a pair of heels, perhaps these ones, perhaps some of you like them, right? And seeing a pair of heels, and you didn't walk into the mall thinking about those pair of heels, but now suddenly you're like, these pair of heels are what I want. This is what will solve my life, right? And so the idea that the commodity, a commodity that you weren't expecting, an encounter that you weren't expecting, has produced that desire. Our desire therefore attaches to various kinds of objects. It doesn't only attach to men and women. In fact, the recognition that it only attaches to men and women is the failure of desire. And I'll come to that in a bit, right? Which is my critique of sexuality as well. I don't want just gender to go, I want sexuality to also go, simply because I haven't had sex in like 6 years. So I really want all of you to also stop having sex. I'm really hating JNU these days. So if our desires actually attach to various men on the street, you give two, three men on the street a look, or various women, or various cars, or various clothes, etc. Then desire in some sense can attach to anything, any object, right? So if we are constantly being rejected by so many objects, how do we stay sane? I don't get the pair of heels I wanted. I don't get that gorgeous sari that woman was wearing. I don't get to get the earrings that Pramada is wearing right now. This stunning, right? And so I'm rejected by not only Pramada, but I'm rejected by her earrings as well, right? And so how do I stay sane? I stay sane because there is a social plot of sanity, which is called love. This social plot of sanity gives me the necessary optimism to survive rejection. What do I mean? Think about long distance relationships where you tell yourself, because the social plot is given, that distance makes the heart go fonder. It's complete and utter nonsense. Right? But we tell this to ourselves in order to survive rejection, to survive the rejection by the object. Right? And the problem isn't with distance, it's also with the lover, but I'll come to that in a second. So these various formulas, my favorite formula which Ki Awaaz also quoted, is that the truth of our desires, the truth of how truly I feel close to you, is directly proportional to the intensity of the conflict it generates. So if I fought caste, my love is truer. If I fought age, my love is truer. If I fought my best friend for my love is truer. The more conflict, the truer the love. Another plot of optimism. We tell ourselves we love people more truly if they betray us. We love them more truly if there's more distance. We love them more truly if they don't answer my 45 WhatsApp messages. Right? So the social plot of love is precisely the plot that gives them optimism. But insofar as the plot of love is social, it is deeply conservative. Only some people are recognized as loving people and others are not. Let me make my second last point with regards to this. Sadly. Quickly. Rohit Vemula, who recently passed away, wrote a suicide letter in which in the opening paragraph he writes that love has become half-hearted. Remember that Rohit Vemula doesn't say that he's fallen in love with some woman or some man. He fell in love with science. A Dalit man wasn't allowed to love science. Right? The object isn't your conventional object of sexuality. This is not a love letter to a man or a woman. This is a love letter to science and to all of us. In this framework, therefore, when Rohit Vemula says that love has become painful, he's arguing for a democratic vision of love. He's arguing that love be sort of the power of conventional love, of conservative love, of romantic love, of heterosexual love be taken away from it. And the various kinds of objects to which I attach it be recognized. Right? Science, nature, stars, the university, friends, etc. All of these were love. And this is my final point. The thing I keep talking about love is that it makes a lot of sense to a lot of people. The ABBV wants you right now, and Smriti Irani wants you right now to fall in love with Mother India. Right? Now what is my problem with Mother India? And this is why my bit is not really a lecture to all of you, but to Smriti Irani. Insofar as there was somebody called Freud or Fraud or something like that, he said that our primary desires are with our mother. Unfortunately, mummy is taken by daddy. And daddy is a good old patriarch and doesn't want you to have his property. So what you actually wanted was mummy, but you can't get her. Insofar as you can't get her, you're constantly looking for other replacements for mummy. Which could be daddy, which could be girls who make rotis like mummy, which could be boyfriends who remind you of daddy, and all of those things. So if you're constantly looking for replacements, the objects that you attach your desire to are going to fail you because they're not the original. Mummy nahi milegi, baki sab to disappoint karenge hi. Right? The point is that the lover is precisely the problem with love. He is the object that stands in the way of love. Right? And insofar as the ABVP and Smriti Irani want you to fall in love with Mother India, it's precisely Mother India that will disappoint you and will continue to disappoint you. She will not love you back the way you want to love her back, even if you want it to be a good old Hindutva subject. Right? And that's my final point to make. The point about a democratic love that Rohit Vemula argues is precisely against this kind of love because it recognizes disappointment. It recognizes the cruelty of the object of love. Right? So if sexuality is about who I fall in love with, if the person I fall in love with is going to betray me, I'd rather that my identity not be dependent on betrayal. I'd rather sexuality as LGBTAPQIH be reduced to none of this, right? Be none of this, because all of these are going to disappoint, right? And I want to survive in the world and I want to thrive in the world, not be constantly disappointed, cry myself to bed, much like we all mourned over. But who gets to mourn, right? Rohit Vemula's own mother is not allowed to mourn at India Gate and is dragged by police cops for lighting a candle for her own son, right? So the object is not simply of loving, but also mourning. And it's about time that I start mourning gender. My relationship with gender and sexuality is now over. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, I'm not even going to try and summarize because I think every point in there needs like a separate talk in itself. Except that one line from Jab Bhi Met comes to mind where she says, "Bhai sahab, aap convince ho gaye ya main aur bolun?" I think so. There are a lot of thoughts I'm sure you sparked off there, but some even here. So if Kamla, you would like to respond.
So thank you, brilliant. I think that one of the challenges is that we fall into the trap of looking at gender as women. And in fact, when you were doing the whole thing on Jab Bhi Met, I was like, yeah, but gender has men in it. And somewhere we sort of almost exclude the fact that men exist, and that I actually feel that for other reasons, yes, you wish. But I do think that the way gender plays out for men is also something that we really need to start talking about and understanding, because there is a way in which men are being trapped in being a particular kind. So when we start talking about the real man, I mean, when Farhan Akhtar starts telling you that there is a real man floating around somewhere, clearly this real man, which is all the men in this room, I hope you know that you have the lovely and wonderful task of protecting us. That's all your job in life is. You have to protect us, you have to look after us, you have to feed us, clothe us, because clearly as women, those of us who call ourselves women are incapable of doing any of these things. And you're the only true answer to our lives. Which I hope you realize is a huge pressure on all of you, besides the fact that you're rapists, besides the fact that you're all violent. And for me, it fascinates me that in this country, whenever there is any of this, I don't see a male movement coming up. And I sort of wonder, like, what is wrong with you, with the men, and with you apologies, that don't you feel like saying, but I am not the rapist. I am not the person who violates. I am not any of this. And stop taking away my agency by being that creature who everyone despises. So to me it is fascinating that when we talk of gender, we boil it down to women and the tragedies and traumas that all of us have. And I love the way in which you linked it up with violence, and that we play out gender, but violence is fine. So for me it's a call of what do men think about gender, and how do you see your gender, and what is it that stops you from saying, hey, I am not that person. But clearly that I don't see at all happening in India. I can see millions of women out on the streets, the number of men are increasing, but it's still kind of not quite there. The second point I actually, which you got me thinking about Bharat Mata, is that yes, of course, clearly you're meant to love Bharat Mata a particular kind of way. For me, the point is, can we love Bharat Mata in our own way? What are the negotiations we're doing for that? Are we doing those negotiations? And if we are not, why aren't we? Because it's very easy to diss the concept. I mean, and I think I've been thinking a lot about this, because I've just been sort of saying, of course, there is a sense in me which I love this country. This is the country I've lived in. I've opted not to be in any other country. And I live here. This is my country. I am not going to allow you to dictate what my love for my country is. And so if we are going to fight, it's fine. Of course we love Bharat Mata, and exactly as the way that many of us who quote unquote are practicing Hindus have turned around and said, we are not Hindutva, but we are Hindus. And I think we have to start having that fight. We cannot always be in this kind of mode of saying, you're talking crap. Okay, so you're talking crap, but we are talking sense. Where is that sense? We are constantly, and I think that this holds true for a number of things. We're being reactionary. Sometimes I feel like, couldn't we have had these debates a long time ago, where we did it because we believed in it? And I'm coming from a point where I feel that all the activism that I have done in whatever number of years has always come from a point of saying, Acha, you said this. Ji, main to believe nahi karti hu, main kuch aur karti hu, now let me tell you about it. And which is why now I am not out on the streets. Because part of me says that we're always reacting. can we set up the agenda for a conversation on whether it's gender, whether it's nationalism, whether it's on caste politics, whether it's on any effing thing under the sun, where we are dictating the terms and we're not having to constantly prove to the others. So for me, yes, love your nation. Love it the way you want. You know, love each bit of the things that you want in the way that you choose to do it, and don't let others dictate for you. So if you love your gender, fine. So for me, one of the ways that my thought process has moved is that I would have been at a point where I thought any woman doing Karwa Chauth was like, my God, are you crazy? Do you really think your Karwa Chauth is helping that man live? I mean, and if he does, like, Jesus, it's a whole other thing. So now it progressed to men saying, but you know, we're very understanding and we do Karwa Chauth with our wives. Damn good, I'm very happy for you because that's a progression. But right now my thing is, you want to do Karwa Chauth, you want to wear sindoor, you know, all the manifestations of marriage with whichever religion tells you, go ahead and do it with joy and pleasure. But remember that when you wear sindoor and I don't wear sindoor, what does it mean for me? When you do Karwa Chauth and the new daughter-in-law comes to the house and doesn't do Karwa Chauth, what does it mean for her? Can you just spare a thought for that? I'm not for banning Karwa Chauth, just think it through. Because the challenge for us is we don't think. We don't think for ourselves. We are told how to think. Whether it's me talking, whether it's Vikramaditya, whether it's Shambhavi, Manak, YKA, we're constantly telling people how to think. Where is the independent thought process that is happening, and where is that independent questioning? So for me, it's even about gender. Where is the questioning we are doing on gender, being in the gender we choose to be, or being in the gender that was assigned to us, and reveling in it, and yet asking those questions, but on our terms.
So with that, I think there is some space for interacting outside. There is tea, coffee, and some cookies, I'm told. So yeah, along with cake, cookies. But one important little Twitter victory. It seems YKA Social is trending on Twitter in India. So yay for all of those who are on Twitter and contributing to that. And big thanks to you, Ki Awaaz, for organizing spaces like this. Whoever has not already seen the website, please go and definitely follow, check it out. That's what is trending. YKA Social, so tweet while you're having your tea and cookies. And yeah, all of us are here for a bit to have more discussions outside. So thank you very much for coming, and pleasure to be here.
Yeah.